Hello, everybody. I am just going to start doing these once a week. If you cannot make the Thursday session where we have our Zoom discussion, or one of the other days' Zoom discussions, then I'm going to try to post a video going over some of the assignment for the week or some of that kind of stuff, material that we cover, so that you can make sure you're on the right track and maybe preemptively answer any questions you might have. You can, of course, still get in touch with me on your own if you have other questions, but I thought this might help. Anyway, this week, we don't have a whole lot to talk about as far as material because, first of all, you should have read your novel and finished it, and you have two different novels. So I'm not going to give a synopsis of two entire novels. But what I will do is go through the assignment for this week that, of course, is due on Monday, and maybe you can get a little bit of idea from what I'm going over here as to which direction you'd like to go. As you can see here, you're just going to choose one of these essay topics and write a one-page essay that explores it. Excuse me. And by one page, I mean, double-spaced one page, that's not really that much. You could certainly go on to 2 or 3 pages if that's what you want to do. That's fine. But you would want to include at least 3 quotes from the text to support your argument. You don't have to cite those in any specific way. You can just say, give me a quote, and then I'll assume it's from 1984 or Brave New World. You can use outside sources if you like, but that's by no means a requirement. Okay, so for 1984, I'm just going to talk about each of these and kind of give you some ideas. So you could talk about how is technology used by Oceania as a method of social manipulation and control. There are lots of things that would work for that. The telescreens, the ministry that Winston works for, all the cameras outdoors. There are just tons. So you can use anything like that. What is the symbolic significance of Room 101 in the book? Remember, that's at the end. That's the one where he's locked in there. Everybody's experience of Room 101 is somewhat different. What do you think that symbolizes? I'm not going to totally give that away, but, why is it so horrific for Winston? How does it affect him? And why is the fact that it's different for every person important? Describe the role of Big Brother in the novel. How does Big Brother affect Winston and his obsessions towards it? I mean, Big Brother is a concept you've probably heard of. It was a show. Certainly, it's very central to the novel. And how does it affect Winston and his obsessions towards it? Winston wants to overthrow it, but he's also obsessed with it. And his entire life is in some way connected to Big Brother. So, could this novel occur without that level of surveillance? And if so, how would that change it? So that's one way to go. And I think your answer is probably going to be no, things would be quite different if they didn't have that level of surveillance. So Big Brother's important. Trace Winston's actions that led to his fallout with the party and ultimate destruction. That one's pretty straightforward. How did Winston go from being somebody who was in the party's good graces to somebody who had to go to Room 101? What different steps were taken there, and how did that affect him and affect the novel? Can he overcome his downfall? Do you think it's possible that he could have gotten away with it? Is there an option for him? Are things going to be better if he goes to Eurasia or somewhere like that? If he were to somehow get out of his culture, is there another option? Can he really escape? So, and if he stays, is there a way for him to overcome what happens to him or to avoid it? I'm not sure. You can also look at overcome as, can he ever get back to who he was? Because, of course, at the end, it ends with that iconic final line, which I won't give away, but can that be overcome? How do Newspeak and the party's social manipulation limit the citizens' free thoughts and self-expression? Pretty straightforward. Does the way they manipulate language, what Winston does at his job, what, the party does in general, and the other ways they socially manipulate, like the 10-minute hate and stuff like that, how do those really affect the free thoughts and self-expression of the citizens? Do people still have the right to think freely or even the ability to do so? How does Julia's and Winston's parallel opinions towards the party contrast with their motives? How do the two differ in their ideas of fatalism? Fatalism, of course, is just not caring what happens to you. Obviously, fatal there. So, how are the two alike and different? What are their motives? What are they trying to accomplish with their behavior? Both are acting out against the party. How are they doing that? And how is the way that they differ in doing that showing something about them that's important? What are the roles of the Ministry of Love, Truth, Peace, and Plenty in the lives of Oceania's citizens? Again, pretty straightforward. What do those different ministries do? I'm not going to give that away, but you could certainly look that up in the text and explain how they function and how they let that society continue to function the way that it does and subjugate its citizens. All right, so that's it for 1984. Let's move on to Brave New World. Brave New World. You have, I think, a few more choices here, but still, decent amount. All right, what does the title Brave New World mean? I will give you a hint. If you did not look it up, Brave New World is part of a quote from Shakespeare's The Tempest. So, how is it used here? How does that connect to characters like John Savage and his book that he reads? You know, how does that connect to Huxley's ideas? You can go a lot of different ways with that. How does the world state compare to today's world? That's self-explanatory. What is the primary theme of the book, and is it meaningful to the plot? You have a lot of different themes in this book. Things like freedom, things like love, things like intellect and social control through giving people what they want. You have tons of different themes you could explore. Those are all pretty central. You can pick one of those and describe how it's meaningful to the plot. Does the plot seem predictable? Okay, I think that one would probably go better with this one. You could write an essay if you want to about whether the plot seems predictable. You know, and that's in many ways opinion based. But again, even if you do that, you're going to have at least your 3 citations. How is John's conditioning contributing to his perception of freedom? So think of the fact that, you know, we always consider the citizens in the world state to undergo conditioning, but everybody undergoes social conditioning in some way. So even though John's not part of the world state as a child, and even though he doesn't go through this, the Pavlovian conditioning that they do, he still goes through some conditioning. So how does that contribute to his perception of freedom? Is he able to perceive freedom in another way because of how he was raised? Does the fact that he was raised in the reservation and that he was an outcast and stuff, has that in some way affected his perception of freedom? What is Soma and how does it contribute to the central theme of Brave New World? I think you probably know what it is. I will tell you that Soma means body in Greek, if that means anything, and if you can use that. And how does it contribute to Brave New World? How is Soma used to control the populace, essentially? And how is it used to make everybody's life both easier and more difficult? How do the perceptions of Bernard Marx, the savage, which would be John, and Helmholtz Watson allude to freedom? And how has freedom been presented in the novel? So how are these 3 men similar and different? What do they all have in common in their views about freedom? And what do they all have that's different in how they see freedom or what they want as far as freedom? And how they see freedom as being a possibility. So, you know, that's something you could look into there with freedom. Do all the citizens of the world state contribute because of free will or as a result of the conditioning? So, in other words, do you think they want to behave this way, or are they conditioned and forced to behave this way? You could go either way on that. What are the views of freedom by Bernard? Sorry, we already had that. What are the problems associated with the conformity the author displays in his portrayal of the world state? So, problems that are associated with conformity, and obviously you could talk about all the multiple children from the, what was that process called? The one with the budding eggs, you know what I mean, the multiple twins. You could certainly talk about that, but you could also stick to alphas and betas who don't undergo that, the Volkanovsky process, that's what it was called. So you want to look at conformity, What kind of problems are associated with that? You could look at Lenina. How does she conform and yet not want to conform? Helmholtz, Bernard. These are all people that have problems conforming. Other characters don't seem to have so much of a problem. Is it because they're less intelligent? Is it because they're less interested? Is it just because they can get along better in the system? And maybe it's also because they're not as deeply drawn. All things you could look at. How do the citizens contribute to their own stresses? Interesting. You could look into that. Lenina might be a good example of that. Really, any of them. John, Helmholtz, any of them, Bernard. How do their own behaviors, whether they are something that is condoned by the government or not, contribute to their own stress? And how do they deal with the stress, too? That might be something to look into. How do these different characters deal with some of the stresses they undergo? Do you agree that Huxley moralizes sexuality in more than one way in the novel? Sorry for that little pause. So, we could look at Lenina's relationships and how she behaves. We could certainly look at John and what he thinks of sexual behavior. And I should make it clear here, sexuality here has nothing to do with hetero or homosexuality. It's just how does Huxley deal with and moralize sexual relations between or attraction between people in different ways. We could look at John. We could look at John's mother. We could look at Helmholtz and his behaviors. There are lots of different people. That conversation Lenina has with Fanny at the beginning about monogamy being something she wants, but not really being able to put her sort of wrap her mind around that. All those kinds of things could work well there. Why did the world state in Brave New World fail? Okay, so you could talk about that, or in what ways is it maybe going to fail? And of course, you'd have to talk about people going to the islands and some of that kind of stuff. So that might be an interesting one. But make sure, again, you follow the book and you go with information from the book. Don't just talk about how their ideas are wrong and silly and so forth. You could certainly talk about that, but you're going to have to give examples from the text. What role do women play in the book? Again, you got John's mother, you have Lenina. Those are your two biggest female characters, but there are other women as well. You could talk about any of them. And has the world state achieved racial and gender equality? Interesting concept. We don't hear a ton about race. We do a little bit. They do talk about, something about an ovary, and basically it's implied, I forget the term they use, but that it's from a black woman, I feel like. It was from Nigeria, Nairobi, somewhere. Anyway, so they do talk about some of those things a little bit. But race doesn't come up overtly a whole lot that I noticed. Maybe you noticed something I didn't. And then also gender equality. Is there gender equality between people in this society? Probably more so than in the 1920s America or Britain when Huxley was writing. But is it true gender equality or not? So that's a concept that you could also explore. All right, so for next week then, you're going to be looking at some of the background stuff for the new novel, Things Fall Apart. Many of you got that novel from me before we left. If you didn't, I posted a PDF link to it, so you can link to the PDF and read it that way if you don't have the text. But next week, I think, is all the background information. So we'll talk a little bit about post-colonialism, and we'll talk a little bit about Igbo or Igbo culture, and then we'll get into reading the novel itself. So again, if you have any questions, get in contact. Otherwise, have a nice weekend.